wants to speak with us.
This is a fairly short story. I'm currently a 19-year-old female. When I was younger, my mum unwillingly gave me her old Ouija board, the one she used when she was a kid, so around sometime in the 80s. I started playing around with it when I was probably 11 or 12. Anyways, I'd always been fascinated with ghosts and spirits, anything to do with the paranormal. Although I didn't really know much about Ouija boards then, I also didn't know how to properly use one. So long story short, I think as a kid I might have let lots of spirits through or something, cause since then I've had lots of unexplainable experiences. There's always one that comes to mind. It was around the time I was about to move, because for some reason that increased the activity. My mum was out to get teriyaki for dinner and I was watching television in the living room. It was around 6 p.m. in the evening. I was laying on the couch watching my favorite cartoon when I got this feeling of panic. I felt as if something was watching me. I even heard the floor creaking, like there was someone in the bathroom hallway. I remember turning down the TV and looking over at the other couch where my 2 dogs were momentarily sleeping, their ears slightly shifting around. I heard what I thought sounded like the closet doors slowly open, and all of a sudden, I heard a loud thump. My dogs woke up and frantically jumped off the couch and started barking. They started running for the front door like someone was there. I quickly sat up and turned around. I was expecting to be met with something or someone. And all I see is my Ouija board, laying right down beside the rug in the walkway of the living room, which is about 12 to 15 feet away from the closet by the bathroom. I remember picking up the board shortly after and putting it back in the closet. Overall, it was pretty scary and left me visibly shaken. After that experience, which I believe was in 2015 or 2016, I learned how to properly use a Ouija board. When I was about 11 or 12, my 2 friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to the sister, Dee, of one of the friends involved in this story. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back into the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently, ending a Ouija conversation without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend Eri was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asked if there was anyone with us, and if they wanted to tell us their name. The planchette spelled out
A-N-D-R-E-E.
Okay, cool, my middle name. At this point, I was sure that Eri was messing with me.
Y-O-U-M-U-S-T-R-U-N.
Just remembering and writing that gave me the chills. So obviously we're pretty much done with talking to spirits and say goodbye. We decided we'd go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant, and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring. So we did. Eri's always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly, we both get a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, but he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back over and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Eri and I had a grip on either of his arms when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property, and he could finally breathe. He was disturbed and just wanted to go back in his house for the night. Eri and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what had happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis and waist. I had slept alone. Eri couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed, not my choice. And I never scratched myself like that. It never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day.
Please note before listening to this, we were completely irresponsible, and we know this. Back when I was in high school, 2 friends of mine, Olivia and Megan, decided we wanted to use a Ouija board. I was nervous to do it the first night, so it was just Olivia and Megan. It works, so I started doing the board with them. We do this almost every single night, trying to talk to the same 2 entities we thought we were talking to. We'll call them Blue and Red. These 2 entities became attached to us. We know for sure there were 2 because of the physical energy you could sense from both. One was a very strong, intense energy that caused chest pressure and ringing ears. They'd appear shorter and move the planchette quickly. The other was weaker, causing only pressure and no ringing in our ears. They appeared much taller and moved the planchette slower. It was always the same physical appearance and physical energies. I have a tiny story for Blue and Red. However, I've decided not to share, as their deaths are a sensitive topic that could easily trigger someone listening. It started out like the typical Ouija board experience. Electronics turning off on their own, hearing footsteps, feeling like we were being watched, tapping and banging, things moving on their own. We even had objects disappear and reappear in other places. I also have a few razors that were completely dulled to the point where the sharp parts are completely gone. They're just pieces of metal at this point, not razors. It was something that never bothered us because we didn't scare easily. Then it escalated. They became more physical. They'd appear to us. We'd hear them talking through phone calls. You could hear them moving around through the phone and even interacting through dreams. I've had dreams of drinking and talking with them, telling them about my dog who'd recently passed, venting about BS. And then the one I remember most, being put in their positions before death. Olivia and Megan had the same dreams. It escalated again when Megan and an outside friend upset Olivia, Blue, Red, and myself. Megan began to experience some revenge from Blue and Red through the board and outside of the board. The things that happened outside the board include being hit with a car door, being pushed, and having her milkshake explode in her face. The board experience she and the outside friend had after upsetting everyone goes as follows, all in chronological order. Uncomfortable and inappropriate remarks, affecting the outside friend by bringing her to feel an overwhelming amount of anger where she threw the planchette across the room, saying really hateful things, and then having no memory of what she'd done. The board saying, "You're just like me." The outside friend says Blue's name, but the board spells out Red's name. Megan starts to feel an overwhelming amount of sadness. The board says, "You try to figure me out because you're scared," over and over again. By the time the sentence is finished, the outside friend is unknowingly saying, "I'm just like them," over and over again. The board says, "You're gonna break." The outside friend continues repeating that she's just like them, going in and out of awareness. I never heard about how they ended that session. We have since stopped doing the board, but they're both still here. I've seen them. Don't do Ouija boards, everyone.
About 15 years ago, my old high school group decided we were going to attempt to contact my friend Ben's biological dad that had recently died before he got to know him. Now, Ben was absolutely wild. He wasn't scared easily. My high school sweetheart was with us, and he was absolutely terrified. I owned a Native American necklace that had items placed in it for protection from spirits. To help ease his anxiety, I placed the necklace around his neck. We partook in the devil's lettuce and started our session, giggling. I was no believer in Ouija boards. It didn't bother me a bit that we decided to do this in an abandoned church deep in the woods either. Only my boyfriend was terrified, which caused our friends to tease him mercilessly. The board was set up and we got serious. We just had no idea how serious this was about to become. As the planchette moved to spell his father's name, I smiled, thinking this was his method of closure. He was clearly doing it because he had refused to share the name beforehand. But looking into his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen etched into his face. It was fear. I can't remember how it all went down, but suddenly, the board was spinning and had said murder. I was starting to feel cold even in the heat. That's when it all went to shit. The pews, already broken, were shaking uncontrollably, even toppling over. We were in a back room that was essentially empty, but we ripped open the door to discover the pews toppling over. It started a massive panic to get out of the building. As I was running, I realized my boyfriend was not with us in the woods. I turned back right as Ben and a few others pulled off in their cars. Once I re-entered the dilapidated church, my boyfriend was stuck, literally stuck to the floor screaming. The building was shaking. It was ice cold and it felt like a sock had been shoved into my mouth. I remember my best friend helping me carry him out of the building. Within an instant, he had his wits about him and refused to talk about what had happened. He looked like he'd just been through war. He opted to keep my protection necklace on, citing that the demon may follow one of us. We never really talked about what happened, and that was very strange for my very open friend group. We knew it wasn't an earthquake because we live just an hour below the Blue Ridge Mountains of Appalachia and never get quakes that could move furniture. And to be honest, I felt something dark around me until a cleansing 11 years later, after the scariest haunting I've ever experienced happened. I don't know what we released or even have any clue how that could have been a natural event. Something threw those church pews to pieces, and we never went back.
Twice in my life, I've used a Ouija board. The first time I did it, it didn't seem to work out all that well. The board was a bit dodgy, and there was one person in the group who I was certain was moving the glass for theatrics. I couldn't prove it, but I had my doubts. The answers to the questions were sketchy at best, and not all of them made sense. The one thing that maybe might have proved it was real was that I remember for weeks after we did it, our cat at the time would just sit outside the doorway and stare right in the direction of where we had set it up. We all noted that it was kind of weird, as he'd never done that before, but he eventually stopped and we forgot about it and moved on. Perhaps we did make a connection and our setup was just wrong, or our etiquette was off. Either way, I remained largely unconvinced that we had contacted actual spirits. The second time, though, was an entirely different outcome. A few years later, and I'd moved across the country to attend university. One day, me and some of my uni friends got on the topic of a ouija, and we decided to have a crack at it one night. But this time, we'd do it properly. One of my friends was quite an esoteric sort of guy, and he did some research on how to properly do it. None of the others besides me had tried ouija at this point, so we were mostly going in blind. But my friend made us a proper board setup, and even used a sage smudging stick to cleanse the room of bad energies, as he put it. Once that was done, the four of us sat down and got to it. I will mention here that I was still very skeptical, so I went in with the mindset of carefully observing the other guys to see if they were messing with the glass at all. But throughout the entire session, the movement was so fluid and precise that all my doubts quickly evaporated. I was genuinely astounded that there was a supernatural entity interacting with us throughout this entire session, but that wasn't the only reason I started believing. The conversation we had with the spirit was so clear and yet so bizarre that I'll remember it forever. One thing my esoteric friend said was paramount to the experience was courtesy. So we started off basically asking if there were any spirits available to speak to us, and when we got a yes, we introduced ourselves and asked if it wouldn't mind speaking to us for a little bit. We apologized for intruding and made it clear that the spirit did not have to answer any questions it didn't want to, and then we began our questioning in earnest. The spirit we were speaking to was a soldier killed in 1984. He was from Yemen. He quite enjoyed the afterlife, or wherever he was at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, that there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife. He said the concept of heaven and hell were untrue. He also said reincarnation was possible. After all of this, we then decided amongst ourselves to wrap things up, having already had our minds blown away by what we just experienced. We said thanks to the spirit and wished it all the best. We also waited for the spirit to say goodbye to us. This was an important part, according to my friend, as it would allow the spirit to return to its own realm easily. And that was it. I walked out of that room with a strange feeling of bewilderment and yet also enormous relief. If what the spirit said was true, and I had no reason to believe it was lying to us intentionally, then death was almost something to look forward to. I considered myself a pure atheist up until this point, but this one night rattled that belief so hard that I no longer consider myself as such, and we will always have the memory of my Yemen friend to prove otherwise. Thanks for listening, guys.
This happened in January 2020. I was 22 and my sister was 15. To make a very complicated long story short, we wanted to contact my ex-boyfriend. He had killed himself a few months prior in the house we shared, and I still lived there. We were always weary of Ouija boards, but we were desperate for answers. We turned off all the lights and lit candles, blessed the house and said the stuff. We were extremely careful to be respectful and follow all of the rules. We connected with a few different entities. The first one called itself Mama. We asked if it knew my boyfriend. It said yes, and that it could connect us. Something then said it was my boyfriend, and it said it loved us, and said XD, which we assumed was the XD laughing face he would use. Then it said that Mama was evil and bad. It asked us to come back tomorrow. We came back, and this time was way worse. It was Mama again. The planchette was going so fast, it was almost getting away from us. It seemed to really like my sister. It kept jumping off of the board towards her. It zoomed from M to A over and over. It tried to say it was my boyfriend again at one point, but it couldn't answer any questions about him or us. I tried to ask what our anniversary was, and it just guessed. And when I said it was wrong, it's like it got mad and started zooming from 0 to 9 really fast, like it was doing for the M and the A. It said it was behind us, and my dogs started going nuts. We said we were going to go, and it kept saying no, like it was mad and we weren't allowed to go. But we eventually got it to say goodbye, and we have never used it again. In fact, I left it there when I moved. Neither of us would ever fake that kind of thing. I've read that it can be subconscious, but I don't know. That shit was wild. We felt so sick and off after. She had bruises the next morning. We don't like to talk about it. It almost feels like it was a dream, but it wasn't. And the weirdest part is that when I think about it, I almost want to go back and do it again. And I don't know why, because it was terrifying. This will probably be a very long story, but I'll never forget it as long as I live. I also didn't believe in anything paranormal or outside the realm of science until this happened. I still just don't know what to make of it, to be honest, and I would love to hear what people think might have been going on. So my freshman year of college, I moved into a dorm in a very old, historic building in Florida. It was 2020, and COVID was still really bad, so each student had their own room. I quickly made friends with the girl who lived directly next door, Jane, and a girl on the third floor, Stacy. Only on the first or second night, we got talking about ghosts and other spiritual stuff, as we all realized we were very into the occult and whatnot. The third floor girl, Stacy, suggested that we make and play a Ouija board. I had tried one once before at sleepovers and it had never worked, but I was interested, and it was a super old building that was supposedly haunted, so we gave it a shot. We made the board out of cardboard, and that was the first of many nights of using this thing. It worked every single time without fail, no matter what combination of people had their hands on the planchette. We eventually got a store-bought board. No change occurred. We used this board probably every day. It became like an obsession. It's all we would talk about. I'm still not sure if it was because the thought of speaking to something otherworldly was exciting, or if something else was going on. I could tell so many little stories, but I'll try to sum up the important stuff. We knew it was legit the first night we played. We were quickly introduced to the entity on the other side. It went by shove most of the time, but occasionally by solo or SO. I don't think we spoke to anyone but them the entire time. We tested it by asking the name of the stepmom of another friend we'd recently made. It guessed correctly immediately without her having her hands on the board. We had just met her, so there is no way we could have known this. On the second or third night, we asked Shove to give us a sign that they were really there. We heard a noise at the closed door to my room and looked over to see a shadow outside of it, as if someone was standing right outside the door. We opened it and of course no one was there. We closed it and the shadow was gone. Little things happened over the course of the semester. Things would be moved that I couldn't explain. The sink in the bathroom down the hall would turn off and on by itself when nobody was around. Stuff like that. After a few weeks of this, things really started to get weird. One night I was playing the board with Stacy's boyfriend and Jane. Stacy was laying with her head on her boyfriend's lap, not touching the board. Suddenly, she started panicking and hyperventilating. We thought she must be having a random panic attack or something, but she claimed she was unable to control where her eyes were looking. We went to take her out of the building because she was so freaked out, and in the lobby she swore she saw someone out of the corner of her eye, then saw that no one was actually there and bolted out of the front doors, terrified. Shove really seemed to turn on Stacy for whatever reason. On another night, not long after that one, the three of us original girls were playing the board, and Stacy told us her back was really hurting. She asked us to look and see if she had a really bad sunburn on her lower back. Strange, but that's where she said she felt it. There were a ton of fresh scratches on her lower back when we looked. This was scary because she was not leaning on anything and had both hands on the board. Around the time of these events, Stacy started to act really strange. For the first months I knew her, she was always very calm and down to earth. She began acting extremely short-tempered and possessive and jealous. Now, this is where I'm not sure what to think. Was it a mental health crisis? Or were our nightly activities causing side effects? I'm not sure I'll ever know. But I remember Stacy screaming at me and stomping up the stairs to her room and being so shocked. It was so out of character. During a fight with her boyfriend, she ripped her hair out and slammed her head on the floor. And then after a week or so, she was involuntarily institutionalized after telling her therapist that she was going to take her life. This was obviously very upsetting for Jane and me. And then Jane had begun having suicidal thoughts. I'm not sure if this started before or after Stacy left. And then one morning I woke up and checked my phone, and Jane had gone to the hospital earlier that morning because she woke up and couldn't breathe. It ended up being some tonsil issue, I believe, but the timing was weird. Both Jane and Stacy ended up dropping out of college for mental health reasons. I spent the rest of the semester and the one after in that room, and never had any serious issues. I had a roommate the second semester of that year, and she didn't have any issues either. I played the board every once in a while to show curious friends the ghost that lived in my room. Shove was always there, but did nothing more than respond on the board. I'm still very much in touch with Jane and Stacy. Stacy completely returned to her old self not long after dropping out. Whether this was due to the removal of stressful college work, or being away from that building for good. Was she possessed? Who was Shove? Was Shove even real? Or did we just make him up because we desperately wanted to believe something else was out there? I'll probably never get any answers, but I guess at least I have a good story to tell at parties.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.